Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this public hearing to order. And the purpose of this public hearing is to hear comments from the public regarding the tentative 2025 budget. This time I'll ask Tammy to read the notice of public hearing.
Notice of public hearing on tentative 2025 county budget. Notice is hereby given that the Green County Legislature shall meet on the 28th day of October 2024 at the Catskill High School Auditorium, 341 West Main Street, Catskill, New York, at 6 o'clock p.m. for the purpose of holding a public hearing on the tentative budget, which contains the exemption impact report, real property tax laws, section 495 of said county for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2025. And further notice is hereby given that the budget officer of this legislature is in the process of preparing a tentative budget for the county for fiscal year beginning on the first day of January 2025, together with a statement of the estimated revenues and expenditures for said county for the fiscal year 2025. And further notice is hereby given that copies of the tentative budget, which contains the exemption impact report, real property tax law section 495, will be filed in the office of the clerk of the Greene County Legislature at the County Office Building, 411 Main Street, 4th floor, Catskill, New York, where they may be inspected and procured by any interested person during regular business hours and on the county's website by October 16th, 2024. Pursuant to section 359 of county law, the maximum salaries that may be fixed and payable during said fiscal year to members of the Greene County Legislature and to the chairman thereof, respectively, are hereby specified as follows. Members of the legislature, each $18,750, and chairman of the Greene County Legislature, $8,440.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. Before we open this up to public comment, I will turn the floor over to Administrator Sean Roden for a brief PowerPoint presentation on the tentative 2025 budget.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board. Presentation this evening will be somewhat of an annual presentation. For those of you who have taken a hard copy, everything in the hard copy will be on the screen. Of course, sometimes the screen, the legibility sometimes is difficult. That's why we hand out the hard copy itself. The presentation is also on the website a few days ago. So with that introduction, let me get started. Forget my back here for a second. This page is what we traditionally call just page 1. It's meant to depict a view of the budget, let's say from 30,000 feet, just to give the total numbers, large numbers, but it does at the bottom of the page that derives the final taxing levy. So, those of you, I'm trying to move my position here. Hope you can see the bouncing red ball. So the proposed budget in this column, the existing budget in the middle column, followed by the variances on the right. So in total, the total budget is a little bit over $136 million as compared to $131 million for the current fiscal year, with a variance of just over $5 million. Those are the expenditure items. Less the revenues coming down to $103 million off of the $97 million from the current fiscal budget, also giving you the same variance as the fund balance contributions to the budget, and I'll show you that in a moment, are equal to the existing fiscal year, coming down in summation, and forgive me if you can't see that number, but it's in your booklet, to the 27,404, which is the existing county-wide tax levy as has been for the last 6 years. Just some civic lessons, if you will. A budget formula is total expenses minus whatever revenues, grants that may come into each individual department. Less the fund balance. Fund balance can also be equated to a previous year's surplus, and then deriving the actual final levy of that $27 million, which is a repeat from the last 5 years. This calculation is required by New York State. This has to do with the 2% tax cap legislation. And I want to put that 2% in quotes. This is how the state approved the 2% tax cap calculation, meaning that no property tax increase can be above 2% of the rate of inflation, one of the two, but whichever is lower. In this case, as of July of this past summer, the CPI inflationary rate was about 2.5%, meaning that the 2% cap, whichever is lower, must be into effect. However, with Greene County, as you see, we had modest growth in valuation. That would be a new house built, an expansion to a house, anything that was done new. It's typical valuation increase for the county. There is the 2% tax cap calculation because we cannot go above that, which means we could have come down, and again, I apologize for this being at the bottom of the page. We could have increased the levy to 28,804,000 and still said we would be within the tax cap legislation. However, as is shown at the bottom, we're not increasing the levy, we're maintaining 27,309. For those people who passed high school math, that calculation that we could have gone to at 28,900 actually represents a 5.48% increase, which is 2%. Don't ask me how the state makes that calculation, I don't, but that's what we could have gone to. We are not, we are staying at 27,309 once again for this year. The following page, which I absolutely know you cannot read from your seats, but this is how the $27 million then is divided across 14 towns. The highlighted marks, which I want to put your attention to, is every town has a different valuation, taxable valuation, and every town has a different equalization rate. An equalization rate being equal to the terminology used to bring properties to their full value, not the assessed value that an individual town assessor may have per community. So when you calculate and algebraically take 116 million by a 40% equalization rate, you true value up there to the higher number of $288 million. That's the valuation. As we move left to right, it then breaks it down into a tax rate per thousand. So $2.52 is the equalized rate across the county. And the final band is the individual impact to the 14 towns as that $27 million is divided across the entire valuation. This year, 11 of the 14 towns will actually see a percentage decrease or a rate decrease in the value that will be raised in property taxes by each town. But again, we come back to 27,309,000, which is the same levy we've had for the last couple of years. I apologize for the complexity of that chart, but that's required by the state for us to go through that math. The key, I think, here is for towns to realize that the real estate market is changing so quickly and advancing and increasing so quickly that it probably should force towns to reval to bring property up to full market value. That's the purpose of the equalization rate change, is to bring communities to full market value versus assessed valuation. Again, I don't mean to get into the weeds, but that is a calculation that we are required to make. Comparatively speaking, over the last couple of years, Greene County has ranked back in 2020, the 17th lowest rate of the 57 counties outside of New York City. We dropped. As of 23, we were the 12th lowest rate per thousand. The state takes 2 years to rate these new numbers, but I certainly expect with the rate going down 60 cents, it will probably be in single digits as the lowest rate per thousand of the 57 counties outside of New York City. Okay, getting back to growth. So this is a historical look at the overall valuation of county property, taxable property in the county. You can see a considerable increase in market. That's just driven by, I think everybody realizes what the real estate market has been doing in the last couple of years. Difficult for you to see at the very top of each year, there's a small gray little bar or a band. That represented the actual increase in something new that was built in the last year versus an increase in overall valuation based upon the market. This is pretty typical of Wayne County in terms of its incremental increase to new growth. Really driven or really hampered, I should say, by the fact that we are a rural county with limited infrastructure and water and sewer, which then does prevent any large scale development. And with the exception of certain portions of the county, there is not a lot of residential subdivision development either. But just looked a little bit unpopulated, if you will. That's the bandwidth again, and again, you can see the extreme increase in the valuation that's strictly driven by the market. But that's the reality of the market. I think everybody understands that sometimes houses are listed in the multiple listing service for one number, but they're actually sold for a much higher number. That's an indication that the assessed valuation practices of the towns are not keeping up with the market value, hence the need for the equalization rate and conversion thereof. After valuations, then this is how much money we're going to spend. This is a total value, which again, you can see that the band there at about $136 million. It's a relatively consistent growth per year. However, the percentage has changed pretty consistent, but pretty drastically, depending upon the year going up. So overall expenses are just under 4% of an increase from the existing year. So 131 million up to 136 million, for a 3.8% increase in spending 1 year over to the next. As you can see, those other remarks of the previous year's valuation increases as well. To break it down a little farther in terms of where our expenses going up. This is somewhat of a traditional chart. Local government is typically driven by personnel expenses. We are no different. So of that $5 million that I showed you on page 1 of the total increase, more than half of it is driven by personnel costs. And that is in addition of everything from payroll, COLA increases, overtime, et cetera. We are members of the New York State retirement system. I have a further graph later on for this as well. Retirement costs are going to go up a little over $1 million. And then you can see the other items as they come down, just kind of in inverse order in terms of size. Those increases are fairly traditional from 1 year to the next, with the exception of money that's going to be spent on the opiate settlements, which is going to be offset by an equal amount of aid coming to the county. On the opposite side of the ledger, in terms of the revenue increases to help absorb that $5 million increase, sales tax will go up $2.5 million from its existing valuation. Fuel herring is a grant and aid that is used to offset legal fees in the public defender's offices for what's called indigent legal services. We have a very active solid waste activity in the county with considerable increases in the tonnage not only received into the county for public waste systems, but for those of you who realize that we transfer our solid waste for the mid-states, so Seneca Meadows is geographically around Syracuse, New York. It's about a 300-mile round trip transfer that we send our garbage away to every day. It's very expensive. Interest and earnings will be up because Fed rate is up. There's opiate settlement money coming in to offset the previous expense, as well as healthcare fees, which are going to offset previous expenses as well. Taking it a little further down in terms of expense increases. This is a fairly consistent graph. Our overall healthcare insurance program, the county insures about 1,400 people in total. Our activity as a self-insured entity is fairly consistent in the last 3 years. That's a good thing for us. And it's a combination of both wellness programs and the fact that the county does buy what's called backstop insurance, so that we limit a single exposure on a healthcare cost to a maximum of $200,000 per year per person, which has been able us to maintain fairly consistent overall expenses, as you can see, overall plan of the $12 million range. As I mentioned earlier, retirement, as we are members of the New York State retirement system, you can see some fairly large increases. This is a state mandate. The county does not have any control over this number. For purposes of explanation, I've also included the estimate for fiscal 26. Another year out, and as you can see, the estimate now is that cost will increase an additional $750,000 over the 25 increase, which is in the $500,000 range. This is totally driven by the New York State Controller, who sets all retirement functions. In essence, he has lowered the return rate of the portfolio held by New York State. Every time that rate is lowered, it will increase local communities' contribution to the system in order to make a system that's 100% funded for future retirees. Next, Medicaid expenses or general expenses, social services. That in the last 2 years has been fairly consistent as well. Previously to that, we were also consistent, but we did see a spike coming into 24. That appears to have leveled off a little bit. Also, that is something that is not driven by county decision making, it's driven by the state. Next is the solid waste operations. I just mentioned earlier, we have a very busy solid waste operation. So revenues to expenses, there's a slight continued variance, and that's pretty consistent from year to year. We are getting to be quite large in our tonnage that we ship annually. And the transfer stations in the last 2 years have gone through major renovations in order to keep us up with both the volume, but also the diversity of the things that we receive. If you can think of normal household garbage, think your 13-gallon garbage bag, to TVs, computers, and you name all the other things coming our way. Of course, if there's a gorilla in the room, it would be sales tax. Sales tax revenue is the single largest revenue that is within the budget. That $136 million of total expenses is going to be offset by $43.5 million of sales tax revenue. Sales tax revenue comes to us by virtue of your 8% that you pay for commodities that you purchase, of which the state keeps 4%. 4% is given to the county. This is a revenue totally out of the control of the county. This is based on discretionary spending, probably affected most by our tourism industry. It has seen consistent growth over the last couple of years. I often worry how long can that increase occur. Do you really get into the weeds? A couple of years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision that expanded what the sales tax could be applied to for those people who shop online. Previously, sales tax was collected from the destination where the item was purchased from. The Wayfair decision flipped that and applied the tax to the shipping point or the receiving point. That's a new revenue that was never received by the county, and it certainly increased our annual collections, which by extension then has enabled us to maintain the levy at a flat level for the last 5 or 6 years. Our concern has always been at what point does the sales tax peak? At what point do we reach a plateau? Because the new activity has now basically become normal activity. So those annual increases now may come down, say it impacts the inflationary factors that might normally bump the collection. But certainly sales tax is a very important revenue, like I said, in excess of $43 million to support a $136 million budget. And it is totally outside of the control of the county legislature. It is totally within discretionary spending of citizens and tourists. As a further note, What's unusual and difficult to explain is that within the last year, Green has experienced a larger increase than our twin counties. The other 57 or 56 counties outside of New York City have hardly grown at all in the last year. Yet Green, for some reason, tourism, the fact that because we don't have a major mall in the county, and therefore are more people just continuing to shop online. You know, we're still buying our sneakers, we're still buying our jewelry, or we're still buying whatever, but we're not driving up to Albany to do it, and therefore the sales tax collection stays in Greene County, and then even New York City, which is by standards of them and the rebuilding after COVID, they're experiencing solid increases as well. But it's very difficult to explain why Greene continues to have this over average increase. And it begs the question, how long will that increase stay within us? And at what point do we reach a plateau? We can no longer absorb the increases. To offset that, then is fund balance history. Go back to that original slide in the beginning, expenses minus revenue minus fund balance. So fund balance again meaning previous year surplus. If you're in the private sector, you would call fund balance profit or loss. So we have a long history with continuing to plow back into the budget the surplus funds from the previous fiscal year. We've had some consistency. We came down in 1 year when sales tax revenue was able to go up considerably, but then we went up in 23 and 24, and now we're saying we're going to be consistent for 25. And thereafter, we'll have to see what the annual surplus is based upon sales tax generation. A way to look at that a little more long range. There's a 10-year history of the fact that every year we've had a surplus, and every year we have taken a portion of that surplus and put it into the budget equation, which then by extension lowers the tax levy that has to be received from the citizens of the county. Again, the somewhat of a historical consistency, see basically plateaus, and then as the surplus continues to be realized, we take that surplus and place it back into the budget formula, thereby reducing the levy. Kind of a summation chart here. Again, the levy has been unchanged in these years. However, if you look at inflation, certainly inflation was bruising 24 or 36 months ago. You can see that it was nearly 5%. It peaked at 8%. Now it's dropping back, but if you took that, I probably should have made that an average and see what the average is. But at the bottom, we've been able to maintain that flat levy by absorbing whatever the inflationary costs due to a budget. Higher utility bills, higher consumable items, payroll increases, etc. But we've been able to do that by maintaining the levy at a consistent rate. I want to go back here. Sorry, this one comment. Again, I apologize for being at the bottom of the screen. At this time, we also have some confidence that the 26 budget will also remain flat. Once again, I'm going to go into further detail on that in a moment, but at this point, all things being considered, sales tax being strong, we do have some confidence that we'll have another year of no increase. However, let's look at those numbers. So now we take the overall formula. If you have this in hard copy, it's probably easier to read. So the bottom light blue is the sales tax levy. You can see that being consistent for the years that I've just outlined. There has been changes in what we would classify as the internal revenues, fees, grants, etc. That shows some modest growth from year to year, nothing earth shattering. Then the light green, well, I'm not colorblind, the consistent fund balance contribution to the formula, then followed by sales tax. So the first column showing the existing budget year at $41 million. With the proposal for this budget, we are increasing that to $43.5 million. Because we are continuing to see some growth. Now we do some projections. Now we look at expenses, labor contracts, healthcare, retirement, other non-funded mandates that the state may apply to us. And we begin to see beginning to be a modest projected deficit for fiscal 26. Now, I would also say that at a $136 million budget for 25, a $2 million preliminary deficit isn't gonna keep me up at night. That's a fairly manageable increase from one year to the next. As you see though, in order to get there, we had to again increase the sales tax contribution to the budget as we do again and as we do again. We move forward. So to attack those deficits, we do a combination of increasing the sales tax contribution, another $1 million, and then saying that either between other cuts, other revenue increases that we can't quite predict with much accuracy, we really can get it down to really round numbers. $100,000 variance on $138 million budget. But if I go back a graph though, if you take that collectively, you're looking at $9 million over the next 4 years. So how do we address that? And again, are we reaching a point in the sales tax contribution to the budget where we will reach a plateau that we cannot with a surety project that the sales tax receipts will continue to grow at the level that they have or the percentage they have over the last few years. And therefore, how do we then address those budget years? Even though they're 36, 48 months away, the county's not going to go out of business. So how do we address those? And how do we deal with the other expenses that naturally occur within a budget from cycle to cycle? I'm thinking. Okay. So summation here. Levy will remain the same. However, I want to re-caution that how that money is raised by each individual town may change a little bit. But overall, the number will not change from 24 to 25, nor does it change since fiscal 20. We are looking with some confidence that we can handle the 26 changes and that the levy would remain flat again, but with an acknowledgement to the risk factors. What could happen to sales tax? Something happens on either the national stage or the international stage. Parts of the world are at war. Is that going to blow up any further? The state can often make shifts to us. And there's considerable talk about changes in the state that also is looking at a much larger deficits. May shift some of that down to us. Again, the national economy or the regional economy. Again, the factor that I want to underscore there is the sales tax, our savior, if you will, is totally outside of our control, totally a condition upon discretionary spending, especially when you're in a county that bases much of its industry on tourism. We need to have a plan to address the fact that either we are going to reach this plateau. At some point, are we going to get to that $50 million mark? Then the only increase thereafter is going to be inflationary factors, which would not represent a large increase from one fiscal year to the next. How best then to handle the changes in annual appropriation levels going forward? That, Chairman Linger, I think that is a summation of my remarks. I can certainly take a question and answer from the board or.
Great, thank you, Sean. All right, Nancy, if you'd like to come up and speak, please come down to the podium here. And speak into the microphone, state your name so we can get your name on record. And I would also ask when you're recognized, please state for the record which part of the tentative budget you wish to speak to. This is a public hearing. It's not a question and answer period. It's for the legislature to hear comments from the public with regards to this tentative budget. However, if there are some questions that we may answer, we'll try to answer them for you. With that, we'll start the hearing. Is there anyone here this evening who wishes to be heard with regards to the tentative budget for Greene County for the year 2025? If there is a.
I'd like to be heard, but I'll defer to Village Council.
Okay. Go ahead. Haven't you turned that mic on?
I believe so, yep.
Johnson, there you go. I will get feedback if hopefully we're on.
I have some visual aids if you take one, please, and pass one down. I have one for you, Mr. Rhodes, as well. Sorry, I'm a native man. All right, with that being said, good evening, Greene County legislators and Greene County residents. My name is Daniel Ward, and I'm a tax-paying resident of the Village of Catskill, as well as a village trustee of Catskill. I come before the board tonight to discuss the allocation for excess sales tax revenue, while hoping to also open the minds to the board into looking to give back a percentage to the towns and villages on an annual basis. Forgive me if I repeat myself, as Mr. Groden Sean just went through an excellent job depicting some of the current statistics regarding the sales tax revenue. I was able to attend my first county legislator meeting 2 weeks ago, meeting 10. Let me first commend the board on how professional and inviting the environment was. The night's agenda was placed on chairs throughout the room, while the meeting was being streamed via YouTube, which I think is excellent to keep county residents informed if they can. Upon the start of the meeting, Budget Officer Charles Martinez went over pieces of the tentative 2025 budget. Following Mr. Martinez's comments, a discussion was brought up by Matt Rivera regarding excess fund balance related to the sales tax revenue. Matt spoke about potentially giving back the excess sales tax revenue, which was estimated at that discussion time to be 9 to potentially 14 million back to the towns and villages. A conversation between Darrell Legg and Matt proceeded, followed by other comments from the legislature. Finally, County Administrator Sean Groden spoke and was very informative as he went over the board's options and spoke of formulas that could be used to get those funds disseminated back to the towns and villages. This discussion was tabled for the evening. The legislator Rivera's idea had now focus. I then decided to start researching what the standard operating procedure was for sales tax revenue sharing in counties in New York, with the towns and villages in said counties. The documents I have provided for the board tonight are all located on the New York State Comptroller's website. The first document, created at the end of fiscal year 2022, shows the most recent map of all the counties in New York, with the percentage of sales tax distributed showed by the different shades of blue. As you can see, we are one of the 11 counties that do not share any sales tax. I contacted the other 10 counties to find out if there had been any changes, given that the report was created in 2022. Since that report, Yates County had just started sharing last year at a rate of 50%. In addition, Seneca County had adopted a local law authorizing all sales tax revenue excess to be distributed back to its towns and villages on a yearly basis. In addition, when speaking with all of these other counties, they let them know that this is a major issue and they deal with it every year, and they are considering changes as well. Let me state that we are now one of 11 counties out of 62 counties in New York that do not share sales tax rate. Pages 2 through 3 on the handout shows the total amounts each county received and distributed to local governments in 2022. As I went over this sheet, I looked for any correlations between the counties that share sales tax revenues and those that don't. What I thought was interesting was out of the 11 counties that don't share sales tax revenue, we bring in the fourth most sales tax. Furthermore, there are 13 counties that bring in less sales tax revenue than Green, and in some cases, less than double the amount, but still share their sales tax revenue. If you just look at our neighbor counties back on page 1, you will find that 6 out of 7 counties that border Green share their sales tax revenue. Columbia County, as an example, brought in almost $56 million in 2022 and gave back 30%, totaling $17,228,368. I will spare you from going over all the other counties, but ask you to look at them as a reference to this topic. Since 2021, Greene County has an increase in sales tax revenue by 5 to 10% each year, which is shown on pages 4 and beyond. Quarterly reports are done by the New York State Comptroller. This increase is among the top 10 in the state. Looking at the annual financial report done by the county for the year 2023 and cross-referencing it with the budgets made over the past few years, you will not only see the growth of 5 to 10%, but also the fact that the county has increased the budgeted amount yearly from $32,693,203 in 2021 to $41 million in 2022, with a projected increase of $43,500,000 in 2025, reflecting this continued growth. As these are budgeted amounts, they do not reflect the actual amount brought in. For example, year 2021 was budgeted for $32,692,203, but the actual was $43,042,738. In 2022, budgeted amount was $36,851,222, but the actual was $45,846,277. These additional funds that the county brings in and does not rely on could be a lifeline to the towns and villages of Greene County. As a trustee, I know how tight budgets for the town and villages are on a yearly basis. The cost of doing business has gone up and leaves those towns and village boards around the county to make hard decisions to refrain from raising taxes, which is something no one wants to do. This means we are forced to forego work on our infrastructure, equipment upgrades, and building maintenance that would save taxpayers money in the future. By giving this excess sales tax revenue this year and/or adopting a percentage of sales tax revenue give back to the towns and villages on an annual basis, you'll be directly helping each town and village with these improvements that will last for years to come. Each town and village in the county has different needs, and so this would allow the towns and villages to figure out what would be best for them each year. By supporting the towns and villages this way, it will positively impact the taxpayers of the county by improving the quality of life in each town and village, promoting economic development with the potential upgrades, and helping prevent the towns and villages from raising the taxes to offset the costs that have drastically gone up and are not sustainable. I mentioned earlier that the county administrator, Sean Grogan, spoke of ways to distribute these funds based on the board's decision. What I suggest and think is fair to all is that the percentage that each town and village earns in sales tax revenue would potentially go back in that same percentage to the towns and villages if the board doesn't make a decision to give back this year or start an annual give back. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge that Greene County, like most others in New York, assists the towns and villages with several services that are vital and that should not be overlooked. I cannot stress enough that the relationships between the county, towns, and villages are very important and make a huge difference to all taxpayers in the county. I believe in working together to do whatever it takes to provide the best life for our residents. I hope my statement tonight was informative and reflective of where we currently sit on this issue and how vital it is to the towns and villages that a change be made regarding the sales tax rate here in Green County. I strongly encourage the board to share the sales tax revenue excess this year and to consider sharing annually with the towns and villages. I want to thank the board for the opportunity to speak tonight, as well as for their steadfast commitment to keeping the county moving forward in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Anna?
Good evening. I would like to commend Sean and the board and the solid waste department for doing such an excellent job on the renovation of the solid waste center. I was there today. My wife left me out, and it is an excellent condition. And I tell you, you have done a very nice job. So that's the only nice thing I'm gonna say. There was a radio announcer, right? Oh, a lot of you remember Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey used to say, after he gave us a speech or a story on an individual, he would say, and now for the rest of the story. I reviewed the 2023 outside audited financial statements and the annual financial reports from the New York State Comptroller's website for the years 2020 to 2023. Since those were the reports that had been on file, 2024 hasn't been completed, so there wouldn't be any on file. And the audited financial statement will not be started until next year. Noted on the audited financial report for 2023, the county's fund balance across all funds, total $96,111,637. I'll repeat. $96,111,637. From the auditor's report, and this is your outside auditor, they noted that the county has certain funds. They have a restricted fund balance, which is usually your repair, your debt service, and your liability funds, and those are restricted, and you do have money in there. You can have a committed fund balance, but there wasn't any committed fund balance as of 12/31/2003. And there's an assigned fund balance, which is neither restricted nor committed. And you have an unassigned fund balance. That balance you haven't assigned to any. The net gain in operations for 2023 was $13 million, $14 million. That means your revenue exceeded your expenses by $14 million. You then had an appropriate fund balance, as Mr. Grogan mentioned, over $5 million. So the 2023 county budget surplus, money that you earned, is over $19 million. Sales tax in 2004 may exceed the 2024 budget by over 7 million. That's based on the New York State Comptroller's report for Green County. And I believe probably mentioned so much so in Sean's PowerPoint. If past budgets result from operating expenses are an indication, county may have another major money surplus. Actual versus budget. And from 2020 to 2023, you've had a surplus that is revenues exceeding expenditures by over $66 million. I repeat, $66 million. And that is noted on your annual report, which you submitted to New York State. Although your outside auditors show the 90-some million. But the outside auditors in their report make some minor distinction between what you file with the state and what they file. I noted on the 2025 proposed budget, 4 towns will have a tax increase. Ashland, Catskill, New Baltimore, and Athens. Athens is a minor, like 3 cents. And Athens is actually one of the wonderful towns in this county, because we're at 100% assessed value. And they have saved their taxpayers a lot of money, and they should be commended. If the county decreases the tax levy by $1,500,000, in other words, increase your fund balance, then no town will have a tax increase, changing the tax levy by $1,500,000. It's not only possible, but given the fund balance surplus enjoyed by the county, that would be reasonable. I also like to mention, and I'm not sure whether you know this or not, I'm sure you don't. How much money do you think you have saved the taxpayers in Greene County from 2020 to 2025? On a house assessed at $100,000. And I'll tell you by town. Ashland has saved $7.50. Athens actually has saved $187.90. Carroll has only saved $15. Coxsackie, $31. Durham, $32. Actually, an increase. Greenville, $49. Hilltop, $34. Hunter actually increased $47. Jewett has saved $42. Lexington, $33. New Baltimore, $28. Actually, Prattsville, $65. And Wyndham has saved $45. So for almost 4 or 5 years, the taxpayers in this county hasn't saved nothing. Absolutely nothing. Based on your budgets, based on your surpluses. So who's losing here? It's definitely not the county. So obviously, it's the taxpayers. They're not saving a dime in these budgets. Now I will tell you that I looked at the various fund balances, because the audited financial statement breaks out the fund balances between the general fund, your capital project, county road machinery, community development and debt service. And each one of those funds have strong fund balances, and you are using nothing to reduce taxes in those funds. Now, I noted on your financial statement to the comptroller that you transferred over $22 million into the capital project fund. But that's not noted on your audited financial statement. It still records that money in the general fund balance. And I'm not exactly sure, I'm not that astute as to what outside orders and what treasurer's office reports in New York State. So we have some questions and some arguments, and I saw the meeting that you had on the budget, and the discussion that you had is very nicely done. But here's the point I'm trying to make. The argument that the county will need the fund balance surplus for future needs, not acceptable. Since the out year projections based on these slides does not take into consideration the growth of the fund balance, if the county continues to overestimate actual expenses, which it has done over the past 4 to 5 years. And that's how you got up to a $90 million fund balance. You traditionally have overestimated the expenses that the county will have and that taxpayers will have to pay. And you're not bringing that money, that excess money, that revenue money back to the taxpayers. I know that you have funds for restricted, actually not restricted, assigned fund balances for various funds. And we don't know what the national inflation rate, cost shifting, or unfunded mandates that the national economy is going to be doing over the next 4 or 5 years. And I agree with Sean that could be a problem. But with that much money in your fund balance, and the fact that a lot of that money is not being given back to the taxpayers. Remember, as our former treasurer Peter Mark used to say, it's their money, not your money. It's their money. So I'm asking you to consider increasing your fund balance adjustment to your budget so that at least no town has a tax increase. And that as you look forward into next year, you take a very hard look at how you're budgeting, especially your expenses. If you're consistently 10, 12, $15 million under your expenditures, there's something wrong. Because budgets are budgeted for full employees. But you're over budgeting. And that means there's something wrong, at least in that part of your budget. And I know it's a philosophy of a lot of counties and towns that you do that because you're anticipating issues that may arise and you want to have money available to take that into consideration. But when that fund balance is getting so high, and probably at the end of 2024, you're going to be over $100 million in fund balance because you're going to have an anticipated surplus this year as soon as you file your financial reports next year. So please, take a hard look at this budget and make some changes. Even if they're only minor changes this year. And as you move forward, and as Sean has suggested, as you look further down, that you really take a hard look at your future budgets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Yes, sir. I see somebody else, Larry, you have your hand up?
Hey, he's here. It's on your table. Um, And some people think I'm a wild-eyed liberal, but I'm here to urge caution and conservatism. And that this board, do a lot of thinking of cautious, slow thinking before you give up funds. Funds we're talking about aren't yours that you want them for the purpose of keeping them. You would want them at the county level for the purpose of using them in public good. There's talk about giving the funds back to the people. Well, that is what you should do. But at the county level, you're able to take care of projects that simply cannot be addressed at the village or town level. For Tom, you will remember, most of you would have been children at the time, but Tom will remember when the county took over waste management. Towns used to have garbage dumps, then we had landfills, then we had sanitary landfills, and then we had no landfills. And the towns had absolutely no ability to take care of solid waste management, zero. Who stepped in? The county stepped in. It cost them a fortune. Okay? But the county was able to do it, and the towns were not able to do it. So what I'm saying is, the county has to have plenty full pockets and keep full pockets, because things come along that cannot be addressed at the town level. So when phrases are funds, funds that the county does not rely on. I wrote down a couple of phrases that I've heard. Funds that the county does not rely on. Well, it surely does rely on these funds to be able to take care of the people's problems. Okay, not to keep a big bank account again for the sake of keeping a big bank account. It's to be able to take care of the people's problems as they accrue in the future that towns can not address. The ambulance service is coming up in the future. The towns, everyone is now studying it, the towns are not able to take care of it. The county will have to take care of it. It will cost you a fortune. Don't give the funds up. I'm urging you, don't give the funds up. Other things happen. Again, we completed that. Fund balance that will not be needed in the future. I could use, it sure is. It will be needed in the future. Ambulance, bridges. Yeah, the board of supervisors, and just remember what that phrase is, the board of supervisors. Once upon a time, the supervisors of all the 14 towns, they were the county government before the legislature was the county government. Okay, so they took care of their towns, and they also met as the board of supervisors. Many decades ago, they passed a resolution as the board of supervisors to move the cost of maintaining, repairing, replacing all the bridges in this county, be they on village roads, town roads, county roads, that were 25 feet or longer in length, to the county. You have millions and millions and millions of, I'll call them legacy expenses, sitting out there in fund to take care of bridges on town roads, and you have to be ready to do that. For the people, not for yourselves, not for the sake of keeping the money in the bank as you long big balances.
It's money that is going to be needed in the future. So you're listening to a liberal urging you to be cautious and conservative. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. All right, is there anyone else here this evening who wishes to be heard with regards to the tentative budget for Green County year 2025? One more time, is there anyone else here tonight who wishes to be heard with regards to the tentative budget for Green County for the year 2025? Okay. I want to thank everyone for attending this public hearing. And thank you for your attention. And I will now close the public hearing. Thank you.